But anyway,
Yeah, we're all always on tape. See, I don't have a problem with that. I
morning.
just take the Ozempic. But for what
put
it's
it
made
side by
for.
side if you want.
Yeah, they were considering, look, our side, if you want to strike the non-lapse.
All right, let me call this meeting to order.
All right.
All right. Let's call the meeting to order, the Committee of Conference on House Bill 534. We have the members from the House, myself, Representative Weiler, Representative Leishman, Representative Renzullo, and Representative Vale. And I see from the Senate, we have Senator Avard, Senator Pearl, and Senator Waters. That's with 2 Ts, Ken. Okay, we have a side-by-side presented from the researcher for the 2 versions of the bill that we're meeting on, and there's quite a difference. Both in, the House version was 2,500,000, and it did not lapse. The Senate version is 500,000, and it does lapse at the end of the biennium. Is there any middle ground that anybody wants to suggest?
Senator Pearl?
So thank you. When we had this bill in finance, I had spoken with the bill sponsor about the reduction down to $500,000, and he was fine with that at the time. My understanding is what he'd like us to change is make it non-lapsing. And I guess I would propose that if the House members would be willing to come to the 500,000 and make it non-lapsing, I think the Senate would be agreeable with that.
Okay. Anything on the House side? Representative Leishman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. As you may recall, this came out of the full Finance Committee initially of not to pass at all because there was some concern that we do have another fund, the water fund, that has many, many, many millions of dollars in, and there's a feeling among Division 1 that recommended to the full Finance Committee that we not pass the legislation. It did pass on the House floor. The Finance Committee decision was overturned by about 5 votes. So there's a little history there that, so I'm not in a good place to recommend anything at this point because after our review in full finance, it was a concern that we were adding another fund that already had a fund to support groundwater issues.
Also, it's not just 2,500, 2,500,000, it's 500, it's 5 million, because it's 2.5
Each year?
each year.
Okay, so that is a considerable difference. So,
May I comment, Mr. Chairman?
Senator Waters.
Thank you. I serve on the groundwater fund. I don't know if others do here as well, but it is difficult for that fund, and I'm not sure that it can cover the kinds of situations that are addressed here, particularly about private wells and drought for agricultural purposes. So that's why the Senate looked favorably on it because, serving on that committee, I can see the argument that we need something to address this kind of particular circumstances. And the Senate going to take this out of the 23 budget so that we were not reopening the current budget, and that we found, as Senator Pearl said, that there was the $500,000 to support that in the 23 budget. And so that's why we came to where we were in terms of the question that Representative Leishman raised and the source of the funding. Thank you.
Would there be any grounds of compromise?
Representative Vale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for me, coming from the Policy Committee, which is Resources, Recreation, and Development, this is a humble sum of money. However, I would be fine with making this a non-lapsing fund And that's more important to me than the appropriation for many reasons. One of which we heard in testimony that the groundwater trust fund is accepting applications that are piecemeal for smaller projects that they're not as prepared for, and they requested this fund in order to be able to address the wells running dry and wells that aren't working due to flood conditions, et cetera. So for the committee, for my position is really that we remove the, which under, on page 3 at the top where it says shall not lapse until June 30th. In my mind, it would say shall not lapse. Thank you
Without a-
so much.
without a- In other words, non-lapsing forever.
Non-lapsing, at least until there's any kind of legislation that breaks this kind of funding up, so that we are addressing the people that need it the most, which is homeowners that are taxpayers in every town in New Hampshire.
My feeling was, looking at what we've done with the side-by-side even, that this needs new legislation, that this doesn't cover what I think we all wanted collectively. Both, as Senator Waters said, that committee he serves on would like more money to get some things done. Most of this money would come in a disaster, which is something that comes along a little later when we see available money. And maybe it's available without legislation very specifically. What I was looking at it, I thought there were a lot of loose ends. It says poor people or low-income people. Who are they? They should be defined. You're gonna leave all this up to rulemaking? You know, and that's what I thought, that this needed new legislation rather than what's here. And I'm not ready to move on with this. At least that's my opinion. I think there's too many incomplete things that I think it needs a new bill that could come next year. Because since we're not under any emergency now, the haste to have this passed is not there in my mind.
Mr. Chair, if I may. We're not really here to have a policy discussion at this point. We're here to discuss the differences between the two bills.
Right.
I understand there may be some tension about the policy in general, but it did pass the House. The real thing that we're here to discuss is the money and the effective date and, and the things that are in the last two paragraphs. At least that's my understanding of what we should really be having a conversation here about. I guess, is there an objection from the House to the moving down to the 500,000 from the 2.5 and the date change? That's really what, to me, the conversation should be about.
Well, you've in effect said it's not in the budget by taking it out of 2023. You haven't really included it in the 24, 25 of the funds that would have been in that. So it's a big change from what we did in the House, which is difficult to swallow. So, anybody else?
Question. If we remove if we change it back to a non-lapse, that means that money stays there forever,
Right,
or except for,
that instance.
well, first, you have to have a disaster in order to go for that amount of money.
Right.
Or to go for that small amount of money. But also, it says that the DES has access to that money to pay for itself. Well, if it sits there for a certain length of time, you think the DES might be using it to pay for
So there could be disasters.
other things that outside of the actual help to the.
Well, again, lacking detail in what's in the law, the DES has too free a hand in my mind.
Secondly, I also was concerned about, this is a direct giveaway
Yeah.
of funding. There's, in most of the time you see in these type of bills, at least what I have seen, people move toward, there is, issues around loans and
Yeah.
things to be able to get people, give people a skin in the game. And also, it didn't come up, and I'll take responsibility for that during the House discussions. Issues around the wells that in the previous attempt at doing this, they had this, there were people going to DES and getting wells done. Were these dug wells that which are fairly inexpensive? Were they changed? Were they changed to drilled wells? That are not inexpensive.
Right.
So there's a big difference, and also dug wells tend to go dry all in the summer, whereas drilled wells are not.
Mr. Chair, do you mind if we could just caucus for like 1 minute?
Okay.
Well, we ought to.
Yeah, just 1 minute.
My office in the corner.
Is this your office? Okay, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, the-
So, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, and we're probably going to just hold to the Senate position, which I know is not agreeable to you folks. So could we at least get a commitment the next session that we could work on this issue?
I'm sure that within his committee that will be, and it'll come to Division One. But I think on this bill, we agree to disagree.
Okay.
But
In an agreeable manner.
in an agreeable manner. Because we see it as an area that perhaps can need some legislation, but not what we see before us,
All right. Well, we'll be happy to work with you next session.
always.
Thank you. All right. Yes, sir.
Yes.
All right.